an Unspoiled Network podcast.
This is Spoil Me, covering Holy Sister, Book of the Ancestor, Book 3, Chapters 23, 24, 25, and 26. In these chapters, we get to see just how far-reaching Abbess Glass's plans really were. And even now, I'm not entirely sure what all has been set into motion. I still don't see the big picture. And you know what? I don't feel bad about it, because neither does anybody else. Welcome to Spoil Me. Welcome to the show, everyone. I am Natasha. Thank you very much to Martin for commissioning this episode. So, yeah, this is a packed one. I'm going to have to really stay on track to make sure that I get through everything in a reasonable amount of time. It's tempting when there's different pieces of magic that I feel like we haven't seen a lot of to really want to focus on that. And then there are things that are answers that I don't like. I'm not entirely sure if it's meant for me to wait until the next section to find the answer, or if the answer is right in front of my face and I'm just being obtuse and missing it, but I will bring all of that up. So, chapter 23. I was really so hopeful that Sister Pan, basically turning herself into a fucking nuke, was gonna solve our Skithroll problem. And you know, when I really stop and think about it, the Skithroll aren't the problem. The corridor is the problem. The lack of heat is the problem. There's an inevitability to this confrontation that, as much as it's horrifying for Nona's friends and her homeland that they are being just slaughtered, there's a part of me that's kind of I don't really know what the alternative is if we whether people come in here and slaughter others, or they stay out on the ice and starve to death, there's going to be mass death on this planet either way. And so, in a sense, the Skithroll deciding that they're going to come in here and take land, I can't help but understand that point of view. And that's sort of where Kettle was, right? When she was watching the whole meeting that was happening, she kind of was getting a little bit more of a sense of what was driving these people. But the Skithroll basically see these, hundreds of people who are vaporized, I suppose is the word to use here. And all of Adoma's fist are taken out as well. I was wondering if all of them would die. I thought maybe some of them might make it through, but it doesn't seem like it. It seems like they're all dead, which, rad. But I can't believe that they basically look at this, furrow in the ground and these, chips of ash-covered bone that remain. And they're just well, there's our opening, boys. They don't hesitate for a moment. They just keep coming forward. And I can't understand how is it just that they don't quite understand what happened? I guess if you're far enough away, you don't necessarily know what this is that happened. So as far as they know, I suppose they could assume that this is Adoma's fist that created this huge explosion and it took down a big part of the wall. I mean, part of it was down already when they got there. Maybe they just don't know that, this was the power of somebody on the opposing team. And even if they did, you can't allow that to stop you when you still have an overwhelming force that's just outnumbering the others. 10 to 1, 15 to 1? Martin says, it says Pan's death killed thousands. Oh, God, did it? I thought it said hundreds. Shit. Although the many thousands charging for the breach had been reduced... Oh my God, you're right. Thousands. God damn this woman. Yeah, that's rough. So Nona looks up and realizes, first of all, that Sister Pan dying is like affecting her a lot more than she expected. The grief she's feeling is very acute. And she notices that Jula and Ruli are nowhere to be found. And this is what I was fucking worried about, because Joelle was listening to their conversation. And I mean, probably this was going to happen whether they talked in front of her or either way, Joelle, I am assuming, knew that they went and got the book. But I can't be sure of that. And so part of me is just like, why didn't you guys just not talk to each other about this anywhere near her? Oh my God. So she has to go to a couple of the others, and like, because of this explosion, everybody's fucking wonky and not able to concentrate or like focus on what she's asking them. And finally she gets it out of one of them that the two girls were carried off by what is doubtless Scherzel's people. And honestly, from Nona's point of view, this must be so tiresome. You know, she's been dealing with this fucking bitch for 3 books now. What is this? 7 years on from the beginning of the first book? Because this book has a jump ahead from the previous of 3 years. And the book before that had a jump ahead of about 3 years or 2 years, somewhere in there. So it's like around 7, right? And it's just the kind of thing that when you really kind of thought you had moved on to new and different problems, and then you find out that that same problem is still following you, that's got to be really exhausting. Just, can we not, please? So what did surprise me, though, I will say, I had expected that when they grabbed Jula and is it Jula and why am I forgetting their names? I'm wanting to say Rula and Julie, because Julie is a name that exists in my world. I thought that they for sure were going to also take the ship apart, and they didn't. And I don't know if it's because they didn't realize it was there, because they didn't really feel like they needed one to factor it into their plans at the moment. I assume, like, I had thought they'd be able to sense it because it gives us such a strong aura. But it doesn't seem like that's the case with people, like ordinary people. I don't know if you need to be experienced with thread work and stuff to be able to sense it or what. So, yeah, Martin is saying the ship heart wasn't supposed to be there. And like, yeah, I get that, but I just didn't think that it was going to be undetectable. I figured they'd come across it and sense it and be like, oh, it is here after all, that it would just be like a giant waving flag or a pulsing light or something that everybody would be able to feel. And evidently they can't. And I don't know if it's a combo of like, they had a mission and they were so focused on that they didn't, if it's that people who aren't dealing in this sort of magic don't have the sense for it, or maybe the box it's stored in, like, it is designed to keep its power a little bit constricted. But anyway, nobody notices that it's gone, and this leaves it for Nona to find and use, which she does quite a bit here. And it's interesting, later on she says something about how it's not that like holding the ship heart hurts exactly. It's more that it forces you to remember being hurt, which is a really interesting way of saying that. This is something that comes up in the Cradle books as well, is like, you can recover physically from a horrific attack, but that does not mean that there isn't lasting mental trauma to the injury that you sustained. It's still there. And depending on who you are, it can be really hard to get past, even if you're physically fully recovered. And that's sort of what I am imagining here, is that it's forcing this mental trauma on her. And that begins to be borne out by the devils that become basically separated from the rest of her as this goes on, and begin to tell her the worst things, the worst suspicions, and the worst assumptions. And it's so terrible whenever you read this kind of thing, because, you know, this trope of something that manifests and whispers the worst fears that you have to you, it works so well because so many of us have experience with fighting off a voice like this all day, every day, you know, and that's something that I think was done really well in The Magicians. I think it's season 3. There is a key that causes an external manifestation that looks exactly like you, that only you can see, that speaks with your voice, and that just talks shit to you about your life and how nobody likes you. You're not good at your job. Do you see how, like, they all feel sorry for you? They're not really your friends. They only talk to you because they feel bad for you and they're, like, guilty over it. Like, it's ceaseless. And the only way to get rid of this manifestation is to hand the key off to somebody else and inflict it on them. And so it's this awful choice that you have to either endure this forever or you have to knowingly inflict it on another person. And it's, you know, not everybody survives it. People have, like, that's almost always what happens, is that people take their own life to get away from it. And that's what these things are, except they're, like, in her, under her skin. And they're talking so loudly that she's, like, answering them out loud at one point. And Ara has to be like, wait, what? And she's like, not you. Not you. And it's really alarming to me that it's getting, because she thinks about how Kiat at one point was whispering all this shit to her, and it didn't get to her the same way because it was a different voice. It felt separate from her, and it wasn't things that she was already afraid of. Kiat didn't have that connection with her to know exactly what her fears are, to target things the way that these voices can. They're born out of her worst fears and doubts and suspicions. You know, it's not like it's just tapping into it and zeroing in on it. That's their origin. So that is so much more intense a connection. And so it's harder for her to shake and ignore and move past. And there are times when at one point I love, it says it told her all of these things and Nona believed them. But in the end, it didn't matter. And that's an amazing line, I think, that you can believe all of that stuff is actually true. You can hear those voices and be like, you're probably right. And still, you carry on with what you know to be the right thing to do, despite whether it's actually the, quote, smart thing to do. And that's tough. That's something that's just, it's a lovely concept and admirable and noble. But God help me, I don't know, sir, if I could follow through with that. You know? My self-preservation versus Nona's is, I'm more of a coward, perhaps. But, or not as loyal. I don't know. But anyway, I'm getting way ahead of myself. So she goes, takes the ship heart, and she heads into this, like, garden to get away from the tumult of everything that's happening so that she can connect with Ruli, because she has the thread bond with her. And Ruli is beaten and on the verge of being tortured. And when we meet up with her a little bit later, she has been tortured, and it's pretty fucking awful. I hate it's the torture is one of those that's my particular horror, which is having things shoved under your fingernails. And it's like specifically mentioned that the needles were shoved under her nails, which is bad enough, but that it felt like they had maybe been dipped in essentially like jalapeno juice, like to just give it that extra fucking punch, which, guys, twice this, like at the end of this pattern, twice since November, I have been emptying my dishwasher and gone to reach for silverware in the basket and shoved the tine of a fork underneath my nail. Twice. And I swear to God, I just wanted to drop dead. the moment it happened. The pain is so unbelievable. And it goes on for so long at the same level. It's not like you can take the tine out and it's not like it stops or lessens. It's the same for the rest of the day. Oh, it's so terrible. I hated it. I hated it so much. So yeah, anyway. And I can't tell you guys how anxious it made me, because Nona asks Jula if she can borrow her body. Let me watch everything, and then I'm going to come in there and take care of it. And then she gets distracted by what's going on with Ara, and she leaves Jula to her devices. And not Jula, Ruli. I mean, they're both there, but she's in Ruli's head. And I just felt so bad for Ruli, thinking for a moment that her friend was going to take care of this, and then her friend vanishes, and it's like an hour, probably, that she's gone. And once Nona comes back, she straight up says, I thought you would abandon us. Where'd you go? But I felt so bad because the entire time that she was running after Ara, trying to help, all I could think was, but Ruli and Jula, oh my God, you're just leaving them. And she manages to kind of be both places at once, which is remarkable. But before she has to abandon Ruli for the time, she watches what's going on here. And this is, we find out later, part of the plan that Abbess Glass had in place to begin with, is that these people are going to get gripped up. Nona knew this was likely to happen, and that she would then have to watch and find out how to get into these secret places to get closer to the Ark. So the first thing is this weird little sliding panel that hides a series of, it's basically combination locks. And they turn them, and she can see or hear, I think, the numbers that they're turned to in order to remember that and use that later. The way that you actually find the little spot in the wall is, its own secret that you have to know where it is. Then there's this I want to say it's almost like a laser. All I keep thinking about is that I mentioned this before because Martin, you knew what movie I was referencing, even though I hadn't actually seen the movie. But it was some movie where there's a grid of lasers that pass over this person, and they basically collapse, diced into perfect cubes. And that's sort of what this winds up being. You have to know how to shut it off, and then you can pass safely through it. But it's all created with this electricity that is still functional, but Scherzel mentions a few times that it's all sort of fading. It doesn't have the same power that it used to. And she even has a remote detonator, but it doesn't have the ability to work if there's a wall between her and the explosive. So, and she's, maybe it once worked with a wall in the way, but not anymore. So this moment when she shows them how this thing works, she tossed the knife out in front of her. It jerked in the air, becoming a shower of bright pieces that fell to the ground in front of one of the dark doorways. A surprisingly musical tinkle accompanied the destruction. You'll like it less if you disappoint me. It can be used with more subtlety to unpleasant effect. Well, unpleasant for the person being peeled. It's quite fun to watch. This bitch is a fucking lunatic. I can't. That's one thing I will say for Joelle. She doesn't have this bone in her body. She likes to watch people suffer in other ways. So that's not to say that she's not a terrible person. But the physical torture clearly fucks her up. And she's not in a good place once once Nona rejoins the party later. Joelle is clearly looking like she's either going to throw up or burst into tears, something. And so I will say that for her. That said, enjoying other kinds of pain, whether it's like physical or not, that's its own sort of like sadism. So I'm not sure that it makes her any better of a person, really, in the end. It's just, it's just like one of those small bones that's been thrown to me that I cling to be like, well, at least there's that. But truthfully, whether she enjoys it or not doesn't matter, because she's still willing to employ it. You know, like she set all of these threads for Nona several nights in a row, or maybe more than several nights. Maybe it was every night, where Nona was going to slice herself completely open on them, you know, and she was totally willing to let that happen and hurt Nona, and she was willing to let classmates die. So whether or not she has that streak of enjoying the pain, that clearly wouldn't have gotten in her way, and she may have eventually developed a taste for it simply because it was something that couldn't be avoided in her line of work. So I love when she says, that annoying friend of yours can do something similar, no? Because I guess it's like sort of meant to be almost like flaw blades. So let's see. I'm trying to find the spot. 6 white doors stood around the perimeter. A huge circular silver door had been set into the floor at the center, its single hinge thicker than a man's legs. Around it stood a trio of the Emperor's guards. And Scherzel, just basically, these guards are standing around to stop her. And she's like, you guys could join me if you want. And they all draw their swords and they're like, nah. And she's going, all right, fine. And goes and tells Saphira to finish it off. And that's when Nona sort of pulls out of the whole vision and pulls away from Rula's mind. I keep wanting to say Julie and Rula, instead of Ruli and Jula. I keep wanting to flip them. And also having Joelle in there as well. When there's Jula, it's like they're so close that I just want to flip those names. So when she comes back to herself, there's this period where she can feel the panic coming from Kettle. And she has to pick up oh my God, Shipheart. She has to pick it up again. Its cold fire ran along her bones. And it's described here again as the glowing ball. So I had mentioned last episode that I didn't even really remember what it looked like, and that I pictured a glowing ball from the cover. And that's evidently taken right from the text. Because you guys know, shit on the cover of books doesn't necessarily reflect what's said explicitly within the book. People who publish books are very fast and loose with whether or not the cover art is accurate to the book at all. And it can be really annoying when you're a kid and you don't understand that that's how things work. And you look at the cover and you're like, but she's a blonde. Why is she who is this kind of thing? So she has, she's in the palace at this point. And she is trying to find her way around to get to one of these fucking rings. Because the introduction of these rings, I appreciate that the seed for them was planted way back when they ran into the Holothor. If that weren't referenced, I would really be calling bullshit on this. It's just such a convenient new object to throw out into the story at this point. And I would feel a bit of a way about it if we didn't find out that this had existed a ways back, and that possibly, and there's no way to really know this, I'm assuming that Zol doesn't know about the one underneath the Abbey because she doesn't understand how Nona could have seen one before. Otherwise, I would think maybe, if Zol isn't the one, then perhaps Yisht was using one to travel back and forth to and from the ice to like report on things or who knows what. But it just seems like that thing hasn't been used in ages, because the fact that when Nona comes through back to the Abbey at the end of the last section, there's like the air around the ring is full of like scraps of like melted stone sort of that had been clinging to it from, you know, stalagmites and stalactites. It's almost like the usage of it shakes all of that free and causes it to sort of like hover in the air around it for a minute. And so I feel like that wouldn't have been able to gather on the stone if it had been used anytime recently. So Nona manages to push her way through these guards who are like, we don't know who you are. She's eventually vouched for by Regal, and this is one of the first moments in which she starts to recognize that the devils have separated from her and are talking to her, because he says something about how he's like he's had to choose who he's going to throw in with. Darling of the Sis, everyone wanted me in their personal guard. I had to choose which invitation to accept from which lord's lady I wanted to accept. And this leads her to thinking about how he's fucking somebody else, he's betraying you, he's like... And what's so interesting is we know Nona's not even interested in being with him in a serious monogamous way. That's not something that she even wants. But these voices are just sort of feeding into this, like, very understandable, don't get me wrong, jealousy that might not affect her quite so strongly otherwise. They're just amplifying this. And she tells him that she needs a room that has a blue light in it, and he seems to know exactly where she means and leads her around. And she manages to, like, as she's following him, she is thinking about how to pass Abbess Wheel's spirit test and to take the black of a holy sister, every novice had to be able to recite the 13 methods for purging a devil and to give a detailed account of how the victim should be put to death and how their corpse should be disposed of. The method depended on the nature of the possession and whether the devil was driven from the victim successfully or not. She'd not worn the black a week, and here she was, unholy and unclean, fit only for killing. This is such a brutal thing, you know? Like, we know that likely things aren't going to... This isn't that kind of consequence isn't going to be at the top of things she's worried about once this is all over. But nevertheless, like... It's not something that she could have helped or prevented from happening. And the fact that she would be blamed for it, like she was unclean, even though she's doing this because she cares so much about her friends that she's willing to sacrifice her own well-being on their behalf, which really betrays such a selflessness that it's nearly saintly. It's just fucked up. It's fucked up. So, she hears down the thread bond, Nona, where are you? And she connects with Kettle here through the thread bond. And Kettle is just, this is awful. She's fighting. The other sisters are fighting. The novices are fighting. There are girls with such bad injuries that Kettle can't even tell who they are, like as she's looking at them. And Apple gets mortally wounded here. And, you know, it's like sort of left in a situation where one could think, well, maybe she'll wind up being okay. But based on how Kettle is feeling later when Nona connects with her, I just accepted, no, she definitely died. Because I was sort of holding on that maybe she would make it through. Which is what winds up happening with Ara, although I will say I really did think Ara was dead. And I was like, well, that's fucking brutal, Jesus. And Ara has made it by the end of this section, but like, she's not in a good way. And it didn't feel very cheap. Since we had Apple die, having both of them die would have been way too much. I just would have been so sad. But Apple being killed is enough of a tragedy for me to not feel like the writer is pulling his punches too much, while, you know, still managing to keep me from feeling like this is all pointless and why are we even here? What are we doing this for? And let's see. Oh, I'm sorry. Martin had a couple comments. Kiat was actually Rimel's devil, not hers. Yeah, exactly. Joelle's, I feel, is almost Draco Malfoy-esque. She can talk the talk, but gets cold feet at walking the walk. I could see that. And I don't even want to say cold feet at walking the walk. It's more that, like, she'll walk the walk as long as she doesn't have to see too much of the ugliness. She wants to keep her own hands clean because that is, like, she's fine with it happening. You can tell her, oh yeah, we killed that guy, we tortured that guy, and she'll be fine with hearing about it. It's just the actual seeing of it she can't handle. And that is sort of a Draco Malfoy-esque thing. Like, he hears about something horrible happening to somebody and he doesn't seem to give a shit. But it's when he's in the same room watching it, that's when he starts to get really, like, agitated. And then Martin asks, so you fully think Apple is dead? I do. You asking that makes me wonder. But I really do. And I guess we'll see. I'll say this. If it turns out that she's not, I'll be a little disappointed. We need to have some significant deaths. That's just, I think you can't write this sort of thing and not have there be a key character that you've grown to like die and make it feel like organic. Because everybody having ironclad plot armor just really lowers the stakes, you know? So, yeah, it's got your lung. Pinch it closed. This is like the whole idea of your lung being punctured in particular, because that makes you sort of drown weirdly, is horrifying to me. So Nona takes Kettle's body here. In a show of ultimate trust, Kettle surrendered her will entirely. Nona abandoned the dagger and bunched Kettle's hands into fists. In Nona's own two hands, she held a power so great that it was killing her, driving every talent she had past its maximum potential, burning her up. She drove forth the flaw blades that had been part of her life for so long, not from her own flesh, but from Kettle's, and made them not many blades, but one from each hand, both as long as a great sword. As they sprang from her flesh, the nun's blood painted their invisible length, giving them form, which is truly horrifying. This is basically like Wolverine, you know? And he can instantly heal once he retracts them, but when they come out, it fucking hurts. And I hate it. That sucks. I don't like it. Like, this is badass and everything, but that really distracted me how much that would hurt. Nona used Kettle's breathtaking speed to lift her from the ground, flinging her arms wide and spinning as she rose, which is wild. She basically just windmills swords. In the midst of her circle of carnage, Kettle paused. Where are Cheryl and Haluma? Here, Sister Oak coughed. There, she nodded to a wounded novice propped against the wall. I'm going to throw you at the path. You're going to take what you need and open a way back to our lines. Understand? And the girl says no. And she's like, I'm doing it. So here we go. And she does it. And she manages to, like, use it and not die, which is pretty amazing. Drag the wounded, keep the passage open until they're through. And Nona moved on, pressing Ketty and Genna into dragging Sister Oak. They had to pull Cheryl, too, as the nun refused to release the girl's body, unable to admit that she was dead. That is so sad to me, those two. The way that both, like, heading into battle as they did everything together, I think was, like, the way that the line went. The sudden wave of emotion that seized both Nona and Kettle, seeing Oak cling to the novice's broken corpse, threatened to shake Nona back to her flesh. So she gets pulled out of this because she keeps fighting as Kettle for a minute here. And she gets pulled back to herself by Regal. And again, gets sort of attacked by her own devils and their feelings about him probably betraying her. And, you know, already, I already said that she's not interested in being monogamous or exclusive with him. But also, I think about Regal's position, and like, he's looked upon with favor, but he's still very much at the whims of everyone around him. And so there's a huge power differential between him and whomever is demanding his services. And I don't know that even if he wanted to be monogamous and faithful, that he would have the choice, you know? I sort of see him as that character from, what do you call it? From the Hunger Games in maybe the second or third book, who he won and he's extremely attractive, and he winds up being basically used for sex by a lot of different, like, high-powered people. And from the outside, being somebody who won and is incredibly attractive and now has a lot of money and whatnot, looks like he's really living the life. But when you get closer to what's going on with him, his situation is really fucking terrible and upsetting. And I sort of feel that way about Regal, is that he's doing better than a lot of people are, like, really, in a lot of ways. But he has his own shit that I'm sure he has to cope with and compromise on, you know? Oh, Finnick, thank you, Krista. Yes. So, yeah, this moment where she yells, "I hate you," and he's, like, totally doesn't understand what just happened because they've been buds as far as he knows. With an effort, she lowered her gaze from Regal's confusion to the stains rising slowly up her wrists from where her fingers made contact with the ship heart. "Stay here. If you follow me, I'll kill you." And without looking back, she turned for the archway and began to run. So, this is when she... Her devils spoke with separate voices now, their opinions tearing at her in ways Kiat had seldom been able to. She manages to get pretty close. She's Flawblade jabbed into the far wall, uncovering the hidden alcove. Nona didn't waste time on the complex tangle of threads that might or might not yield to her efforts. Instead, she simply set the wheels to the same numbers that Scherzel had. She squeezed through and was already a third of the way down before the door in the library floor had finished opening. The far end, there was no door. It was as if a blank wall had risen up, sealing the passage closed. Nona went to the side wall where Scherzel had tapped out her rhythm and did her best to reproduce it. Nothing happened. And she has to do this a couple of times in order to remember and reach clarity and get the pattern correct. Before she cleared the area, something struck her, not a flaw blade, but still sharp and invisible. Ruli's agony. It reached out across their thread bond like a spear thrust. When Nona was new to the skill, the distress would have hauled her mind across to join Ruli without allowing her any choice. Now she had the mastery to resist the pull, but it had never been in Nona to ignore a friend, even if doing so meant that she had to share their pain. In a heartbeat, Nona occupied Ruli's flesh. They had her on the floor with wrists and ankles bound, hands behind her back. The guardsman, who had been kicking her, stepped aside to reveal Scherzel smiling broadly. And this is when we find out what she's specifically after is the book. She says, you know, they're just softening you up. She's like, I've got poison, I've got needles, we've got knives. And I really want to keep young Joelle fresh for what comes later, but if we must, then she can pull what she needs, what we need out of your skull. Though I'm told it may leave you rather broken, which is really the knowledge that's like a possibility is so upsetting to me that magic exists. And this is something that I feel like is not adequately given the like, when you think about Harry Potter and how many people had their memories modified and stuff, it's treated as this sort of like nothing. but it's so fucked up, honestly. And eventually we do see somebody like suffering permanent damage and what that can do. But it's still a little bit of a punchline when it happens. And really this feels much more appropriate, the horror of this. So a little bird told me that you and your friends have been busy stealing books. And by your friends, I mean Nona Gray and Arabella Jotsis, both of whom owe me a great debt for damaging my alliance with Adoma. And the fact that she tries to act like Nona told her, I'm just like, get the fuck out of here. You really think? Really? I guess she does. So, my brother entrusted these into my care, these white cylinders. They date from the Second Age, when our ancestors mastered the secret fire again, which I'm assuming is electricity. At the push of a particular button, they will explode with as much force as a quantal pathwalker can direct. They were supposed to seal the Grand Pass and make it a tomb for 10,000 Skithroll. I told my brother they failed to function, and at the time, I believed it to be true, thanks to some clever thread work. But sweet Saphira, keeper of my secrets, showed me their hiding place and brought them here. I doubt they can open or destroy the Ark, but they can certainly bury it deeply enough that it would take Adoma many years to dig her way back to it. So she needs me, just as she needs my ship heart and I need hers. I give you this information because if you tell me what I want to know, there could be a place for you in my service, little unruly Ruli. And Ruli says, if that was true and you thought they could work, you wouldn't be here. And she says, well, I mean, you're not wrong. If it were possible to detonate from afar, but it's not. So I have to be here. So, you know, what can we do? And so the ship heart you stole, the two the Battle Queen owns. Nona spoke using Ruli's mouth. That only makes 3. Well, there's 1 here that the Abbess Glass kindly donated, and number 2 and 3, and with Adoma. The 4th ship heart I need will be delivered to me by Lanotaxis, and the singular of the Noigwin from the sack of the convent of Sweet Mercy. So this is the first time when Nona realizes she has been previous, when she was in Kettle's body, thinking how glad she is that she made Ara stay behind, because it's obvious that nobody's fucking making it out of this alive. Like, if they do, it's a miracle. And she wouldn't have been able to handle watching Ara die, which would, she believes, definitely have happened had Ara come with them. And so she's really feeling herself a little bit that she managed to save Ara, and then she finds out that the reason it was requested that she stay behind, which I had forgotten that that's how it was specifically like set up. She manages to get out of it purely because of the goodwill that she had built up with Sister Wheel. And Sister Wheel has finally grown more predisposed to listen to her because Nona has decided to become a holy sister. If it weren't for that, she would have been more than willing to obey orders and leave Nona behind. And it's Nona that they were after, trying to separate from the rest of the group so that they could sack the place and take her. Or just kill her, I am assuming. It's hard for me to know, to be honest, what they want from her. And I assume that they just want to kill her because they are thinking that she's like maybe the chosen one, but I don't know that. They may want to use her to like open the Ark if they think that's how that's going to work. If they still believe in that prophecy, it's not totally clear to me what the goal is. It's just like, I have to assume that they want to catch and keep her. And I was going to say that's maybe why they go so far as to send the singular after her, because he's like one of the only people with enough power to keep her contained, I would think. I don't know. Or maybe it's just purely murder. It's just every injury that she gets is like non-lethal. And it doesn't feel like it was going to be lethal. It feels like a lot of them feel like they are meant to be. Like, you know, she gets hit in the calf and in the shoulder with knives later. But Martin says, for Scherzel, I think it's just revenge, slow and painful death, etc. Yeah, maybe that's all it is. I don't know. I like the idea that she's, like, useful in some further way, but maybe that has nothing to do with it. So she has to cling to Ruli because finding out that Ara's probably in danger almost like throws her out of Ruli's body. It has come to my attention that even when we open the Ark, actually controlling the moon may be an annoyingly complicated business. My little bird tells me that Abbess Glass set you children on the path to finding a book that should help on that front. Quite a wonder, that woman. I'm so glad she's dead. But her annoying cleverness is the reason I can't afford not to take this book seriously. Owning that knowledge would really be the cherry on the cake, which is why I have brought you two here. Disappointingly, you don't have the book on you, but you can tell me where it is. And if young Jula really is as studious as Joelle tells me she is, then I think it's worth investing the time to torture her on the assumption she has the information we need locked behind that plain little face of hers. Now, later on, when we come back to the two of them, it turns out that Jula talked. Ruli is able to withstand the torture and doesn't say shit. But Jula spills everything, which is not surprising. Like, Nona had sort of known. Out of everybody, Jula is the one who's... I hesitate to use the term weak link because that makes it seem like Jula isn't as committed. And I guess, really, she's not as committed. But that makes it sound more like she's cowardly. And really, it's that Jula has a loyalty that is not to individual people the way that Nona's is. Her loyalty is to, like, I think the ancestor and the concept of doing what's right for the kingdom because of her faith. You know, there was a discussion that happened a few sections ago where Nona is realizing that Jula really has this, like, connection that the others don't have with this religion. It's not like Nona totally doesn't believe. She brings the ancestor up here and there, and I really think she feels something about that. But it isn't the same. You know, for her, her devotion to her friends is her religion, really. And the ancestor is sort of a symbol of that. But I feel like Jula not wanting to necessarily keep, like, withstand torture, that doesn't surprise me, and I'm not really mad at her for that. I mean, I've freely said on many shows, I would never, ever withstand torture. I would talk the second you showed me a knife. Like, you wouldn't need to do anything to me. I would just spill immediately, and I am not ashamed of that at all. Thank you. No, thank you. So Nona comes back to herself from here after being like, I'm going to jump in and I want to try the doors first. Stay strong. I'll be back and I'll take control. You have to trust me for that to happen. And this is when she, like, bails and disappears for a while. And it hurt me so bad to know how, like, the two of them are just sitting there being tortured, wondering where the hell she went. So Nona she comes back to herself and she's sitting there and she's just like, what in the fuck am I going to do? They're like, I can go in any direction and find people who are desperate and who really need my help. By the time Nona had pushed her way into Ara's mind, her friend had dropped from the path into a fight so one-sided it made the defense outside Crucicle's palace look like a meeting of equals. Ara fought alone amidst the forest of pillars against not scores, but hundreds of Palarthi mercenaries. So this is when Nona realizes she was the one meant to be there, that Ara got pulled into something that was meant for her, a whole bunch of guilt and frustration, and she feels the pain from Ruli being tortured through her thread bond and Kettle being, like, feeling despairing. All of this is, like, kind of overwhelming, and she has to struggle a lot to keep herself focused. Finally, she's just like, I can't lose Ara. That's what it comes down to. And we all have that person, I think, in our lives who, when it really comes down to it, we're just like, that's not an option. You know, like, and that, for me, it's absolutely Owen. If anything were to happen that would put him in any sort of danger, I can talk all I want about being a coward and giving into torture, but if he were on the line, I'd probably be able to withstand a lot. And this is one of those moments where she's just like, well, that's just fucking not happening. I mean, there's like, I don't even have control over the fact that I'm going to go save Ara right now. It's just my body is doing the thing because that's what it does. And I'm like, no, I get you. I feel you, girl. So I am almost out of time and I haven't even started the next chapter. Oh my God, I'm so behind. All right, I'm going to jump ahead. She finds Ara stabbed in the back. Now, she's not dead. I really thought she was. But fucking Clara is standing over her. And I was like, Clara, you bitch. Even with this, Nona is still trying to extend some compassion to Clara. Trying to tell Clara, I know this isn't you. And there's something in Clara that feels like she's hates it, but she's like, knows that Nona's right, that this isn't her. And she's trying to just do the thing where you push people away before they can push you away. You do something shitty because you assume someone's going to do something shitty to you. And even though you don't want to do it, you have a self-preservation that tells you there's no way to stay alive if you don't. And in a lot of ways, I can't hate Clara. I just feel really bad for her that she's so certain of the worst in people that she can't ever put faith in her friends or in anybody being altruistic. Which, I mean, she's thrown in with the side that would be the worst in all of those. It's ironic. The people who believe in the worst in people often do wind up teamed up with the worst in people. And I assume that happens because they are so fearful that they would rather be around those they know they can't trust than make themselves vulnerable by trusting and being around people that they think are their friends, because that's much scarier in its way. And it makes you feel a lot more exposed than just being with people that you know you can't let your guard down around, you know? And that just seems so tiring to me. Like, I understand in a way why you'd go for that. I kind of get it, but it's just sounds exhausting, like living that way. And I feel in the conversation that Nona has with her, I feel Clara's exhaustion. She just is so, she doesn't even want to be here. She wants to still be alive. She wants to still have some control, but there's no feeling of like belief in their cause or anything here. That's not it. You should never have let me go. You had me bound, guilty. You should have let them drown me. And when she says this to Nona, I really feel like she fucking does feel that way. It's like she knows she's going to continue making decisions that hurt people around her because she's trying to keep herself safe and alive. And she hates that about herself and wishes that she could just like have been killed instead of continuing to inflict this on other people. There's something so sad about her, you know? I get so frustrated and I want her to believe in better. But when you surround yourself with people that you can't believe more of, I don't really know what's to be done about that. So Nona manages to sort of convince Clara to work with her, and it remains to be seen for a while whether or not Clara's actually going to do it. But she does do it. Nona gets a bunch of the novices who remain to hide Ara somewhere. And what we find out eventually is that she's been hidden like down this well. And Nona flees from the Noi Gwyn who are coming after her, and they nail her with a couple of blades that have poison on them. So she has to drink the black cure as she's running. And when she gets down there, eventually, Clara like fulfills her end of things and winds up joining up with the two of them. And what Nona does is breaks the wall, breaks the stone in order to turn this tunnel into a river that will wash their enemies away. But the thing is, they're down this hole, and it will absolutely come for them. So they have to run. And Clara, at this point, doesn't know that there's like a portal, a magical portal that they'll run through and get somewhere else. She thinks that they're trying to outrun the water straight up. And she's like, we're not going to do that. And Nona's like, no, we're not. You're right. But we've got to go. There's like a thing that will run through and will activate this. And as they're running, this is like, this fucking thing shows up. I hated this so much. We already have dealt with such stakes in these chapters. As Nona turned, she saw something. At the far end of the passage they'd run down, a white wall was rushing toward them, and halfway between Aura and the fury of that flood, something dark and terrible raced forward almost as fast as the water. One black figure whose lack of definition somehow suggested things far worse than any detail could. The singular! Clara tore into the chamber ahead of Nona. Of all their pursuers, somehow, the dark heart of the Noigwyn had kept ahead of the deluge and was now within moments of catching them. The shadows that surged ahead of the singular carried new terror with them, a threat that made the white fury behind seem a kindness. They just managed to get through this ring. Just barely. All this water follows them. And I love when Clara sort of sits up and she looks around and she says, sorry, probably my mess. I think I wet myself. I was like, oh, girl, that's actually a pretty good joke. So they're back in the palace here. And what they do, and this is really wild. I enjoy this a lot. Nona goes back into Ruli's head, and Aura goes into Nona's head and controls Nona, who is supporting her because she can barely walk. And so Nona's talking to Scherzel while they are making their way up the passage. And because I was just like, how is she able to do this? And it isn't until a few beats later that you find out that Aura is the one controlling Nona. Because I was like, I wouldn't think she'd be able to be like up and walking around while having a full-on conversation from Ruli's POV. So, and as the talk that she has with Scherzel, she basically tells her, oh, sweetie, that book isn't even important. Like, that really wasn't it. The whole thing was that Abbess Glass wanted you to be like forced into a position that would bring us here past all the defenses right to the gates of the Ark. We could have stolen this book ages ago. Why would we have waited to do it now? And I was like, that's a good point. I didn't actually like stop and think about the fact that this could have been done ages ago. And I absolutely could. I guess I just assumed that Abbess Glass was putting pieces into place that weren't quite ready, like with their skills yet to accomplish it. But, you know, I didn't really think about that. And Nona brings up Marcus here to see whether or not there's any indication on Scherzel's face that Marcus was like part of this betrayal. And she does so hoping that it's going to be like, that won't register on Scherzel's face, but it does. It's very clear that Marcus has thrown in with Scherzel, at least to a degree. And she's really bummed by that. She had thought maybe, you know, he was going to wind up being loyal to the end, but no, it doesn't seem so. And even though she hopes that, she brought him into the fold on purpose, knowing that he could be a weak point for Scherzel to find out what was going on, because she needed Scherzel to know. And also when she starts telling Scherzel all of this, there's a feeling of like betrayal from Ruli, because she is, you know, basically what Nona's saying is like, I knew you would probably have to capture and torture my friends, and I didn't tell them about that, which she couldn't. I understand, but it does suck if you are Ruli to know that this girl was aware this was likely to happen, you know? So, and I love too, Nona uses a flaw blade to kill Saphira from Ruli's point of view, because Saphira is pulling up Ruli's fingertips to like jab another pin underneath her nails. So they're right in front of her face. And so when the flaw blade comes out, it just goes right through her. It says entered beneath her chin and emerged from the back of her skull, which honestly is so satisfying. I'm out of time, so I'm going to finish this a little bit more properly next week. But basically, Nona makes a deal with Scherzel and is like, I will let you go if you leave Joelle with me and you don't hurt my friends or continue on with this. Martin says you won't have time next week. I assure you that. I'm sorry. I tried so hard to be on topic today, but it was just too many things. I really thought that she was going to have something set up to catch Scherzel, maybe at the city gates, maybe by the Abbey, but it's much closer to home than that. There's a bunch of threads laid in place to trap Scherzel, and she gets cut apart by all of these threads. And I want to know how those wound up where they are. Was that Arabella's work? Was that something that Joelle had been like ordered to put in place that Scherzel forgot was there? I can't imagine that's the case, because then Nona would, I mean, she knew this was coming. She was watching through the little window as Scherzel went down the hall waiting for it. And did Nona lay there? I always assumed that Nona's thread work wasn't good enough to lay these sorts of traps. But maybe that isn't true. Maybe she absolutely was able to do this herself. I just kind of thought that she couldn't, that she wasn't capable of it. But I don't, so yeah, all right. Oh, Martin says they're standard wire traps, not threads. My bad. So then it was her. Okay. I'm thinking, cause you know how the threads can do like a really similar thing to wire. And I'm just so in magic mode in my head here. That's what I assumed, but all right. Well, I will say watching this bitch fall apart was super satisfying. I was so happy she's dead. Like, sincerely, I hate her so much. She's just so, the cruelty is so casual. It's so incidental, you know? And that is the kind of thing that I just can't get past, when it's not even a matter of the cruelty being the point, which is horrible. But there's something about that feels so alien that it's like there's something wrong with you as a person. And I almost feel bad for you because you're clearly broken. But with Joelle, it's just sort of like, oh, the cruelty, like, I absolutely, like, don't even barely notice it. Like, I'll tune in for the fun here and there, but it's not really about that. It's just, you know, the way I get things done. And that is so callous. So yeah, she falls apart, and everybody had been saying it's not over yet until she begins to like literally slide into pieces onto the floor. And then Nona says, now it's over. And that is the end of this section. And I'm like, oh my God, there's so much happened. Martin's asking, Scherzel's dead. What do you think Joelle's fate will be? I want, in a way, I want there to be some redemption for her, but I just don't see it. I don't think she can. She's not like Clara. She doesn't feel like she's hovering on the knife's edge between good and evil. She feels evil. So I don't know, you know, I mean, part of me like, do thread work and break her brain and make her a good person by force. Can you do that? Like, that's the only thing I can think of that would keep her from being terrible. Otherwise, you just have to kill her. She's just going to keep betraying you. She's truly in on with the other side. I'm way over time, so I really have to wrap. I'm so sorry that it took me so long to get to the end of this section. But thank you, Martin, for your patience and for commissioning this. I hope that I'm doing it justice anyway. And I'm really excited for what comes up next week. We'll find out. And until then, toodaloo, motherfuckers.
was an Unspoiled Network podcast.